If all these stages, the information is vital and someone capture your information, it is a dangerous situation for your organization. If such a situation comes, those information needs to be protected for continuous availability of your services, continuous availability of your business operations. So that is the importance of 27001. So 27001, if you see the history, in 1995 it was 77 BS 7799-1. It was a British standard. This was giving you the requirement for doing information security management operations. And majority of the companies during those time, it was certified based on this BS 7799-1 only. Then in 99 BS 7799-2 published this particular standard. It was giving the implementation guidelines. You have a requirements in 7799-1, but these requirements how to be implemented. This implementation or code of practice was given by BS 7799-2. Then the same standard in 2000 became ISO IEC 17799 in 2000 itself. The same standard has become ISO standard, and in 2005 it has become ISO IEC 1799, and the same year it became ISO 27001, because it was felt there shall be a separate numbering scheme for ISO, because adapting BS 7799 as such into ISO IEC was giving a lot of conflicts. So there was a decision to change 7799 as 27001 in the year 2005. And in 2007, this 7799-2, that is coding practices, renamed as ISO IEC 27002. Since then, this standard is very popular among all IT business operations. Any business which is totally dependent on IT technology, IT methods, and IT systems, then it is for them it is advisable to go for 27001 certification to minimize the risk when they are doing their business operation. So this is a standard for certifying the organization. It is not personal standard. Only the organizations like QMS quality management system organizations can be certified as per this particular standard. And in 2013, the same standard has become 27001 2013. Some of the controls they felt it was not effective, so those and it was not required. Those controls they have removed in 2013 version of 27001, and for all those requirements again in 2013 27002 also was published. This is the historical background of the standard. When you talk about ISMS family of standard, this ISMS 27,000 family has got huge number of standards available. So many numbers of standards are available. And as far as your information security management system is concerned, it is 27,001. That is a Bible. 27,001 is the Bible, and that gives you the requirement. Let it be any business which is done through IT system. For that, you need to refer 27,001. And when you say family of standard, yes, it is starting with 27,000. This 27,000 is overview and vocabulary standards. Whatever terms are given in 27,001 and other relevant subsequent standards, they are all defined. The meaning of it is defined in 27,001, and that is why 27,000. That is why 27,000 itself is called vocabulary standard, and 27,001 is called requirement standards. Why it is called as requirement standard? This standard doesn't give you how to practice the requirements. It gives you only the requirements what are all need to be in place if you want to go for 27,001 certificate, or if you want to go for protecting your IT systems. If you want to protect your IT system means what? You need to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So these are all the three triads: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These three triads, they call it as a triad. These three components, if you are protecting, if you are able to ensure during your business operations, you are ensured that your business operation will not go under any major attack. Even if attack happens, even there is a sabotage happens, you will be able to continue the business, without much financial loss or much loss to your reputation. So 27,001 gives you the requirement, and you have 27,002, which gives you the implementation or code of practice. How will you translate this requirements into actions? That is given in 27,002. And 27,003, it gives you implementation. Okay, there are code of practices, and how these code of practices can be implemented in terms of 27,001. So that is given in 27,003. And you have 27,004, that is information security management measurement. Okay, you have now you have identified the requirements, and these requirements can be implemented for your business operation, IT business operations, using 27,002 and 27,003. Okay, it is implemented. Now I just wanted to measure the effectiveness of the implementation. For that, you can take the help of 27,004. Then you have a standard called 27,005. It gives you how to manage the risk assessment management. So these are all the 4 or 5 important standards or siblings of 27,001 you need to go through if you want to get ISMS certification, or if you want to implement ISMS information security management system in your organization. So that is why 27,002 to 27,007, it is called as guideline standards. The requirement is given in 27,001. How to map those requirements, or how to bring in those requirements into your business operations, are given in 27,002 to 27,007. So you need to take help from these standards to understand and to implement 27,001. And apart from that, there are so many other standards like 27,010. It is information security management guidelines for inter-sector and inter-organizational communications. It is not only that you are doing only information processing, and you are limited with only information security management system. No, you want to go for further certifications, like other automated system, maybe like business continuity management, separate system is there. So you want to integrate business management continuity with this particular 27,001. Yes, that also can be done. For that, you have to refer to 27,010, and you have 27,011, which gives you management guidelines for telecommunication organization based on 27,002. It is specifically, this 27,011 is specifically for telecommunication. When someone is a telecommunication service provider, then apart from 27,001 and other related documents, they need to refer to 27,011 also to get it certified for 27,001. Though they are called as sector specific guideline standards. Okay. Likewise, you have so many standards, like you have 27,006. It is for the people like us, we do the certification of organization. We need to refer to 27,006. It gives the requirement of the certification bodies. Certification bodies, what are all the capabilities, what are all the competencies they needs to have, is given in 27,000. So you have a TR 27,008. It is giving you ISMS control audit guideline. It is giving you audit guidelines, how you need to do the audit, what are all the documents you have to refer when you go for the ISMS audit. And you have 27,003, This gives you guidance on the integrated implementation of ISO 27001 as well as ISO 20,000. This ISO 20,000 is IT serviceman, ITSM. It was pertaining to certification of majority of the BPO organization. BPO organization, there were so many BPO organizations, even still also it is there. So for them, it is mandatory to go for, not mandatory, it is advisable to go for ISO IEC 27,000, 20,000-1. If they go for 27,001, and they can go with 20,000 also. That is what we were discussing here in 27,010. So intersector BPO is a, though it is business is based on your total IT technology and IT solutions, there is a separate standard which is calling for certification, that is known as ISO IEC 20,000-1, and in conjunction with 27,001, this certification also can be done. Then you have 27,014, governance of information security. How information security can be governed at a higher level as well as at lower level. So likewise, you have so many standards. So that is why this is called as a 27,000 family standards. Okay, but we are interested in ISMS. ISMS is pertaining to only 27,001 as a requirement standard, and 27,002 code of practice, 27,003 implementation guidelines, and 27,004 it is a security management measurement. After implementing, how are you going to measure your controls for the effectiveness, to measure the effectiveness. And 27,005 gives you the security risk management. How are you managing your risk? Okay, so 27,000 gives you guidelines for security management system auditing. So these are all the different standard which will be very much useful to plan for ISMS implementation. Yeah, when you talk about management system, we have discussed. When we talk about management system standards, there are so many standards are available. The well-known standard is ISO 9001. Every one of you is aware of it. And you have ISO 14,001. Because why we are giving it here? Because each has got different requirements, but it is under one umbrella. It called as management system standards. But each system standards requirements are different. Well, not like your ISO 9000. ISO 9000 you can have it for any kind of organization. You can have it for education institution, you can have it for your own small restaurant, you can have it for ticket booking, you can have it for any reservation systems, you can have it for manufacturing and production and service. Any type of organization you can make use of ISO 9001 to show they are having a business operation, or they are having a business with quality service. Just to demonstrate that they are going for ISO 9000. It is very wide, it is not sector specific. So any organization, any discipline, any sector can go for ISO 9001. And you have ISO 14,001. This is basically environmental management system, EMS. ISO 14,001. This also give specific to how to control the environment. It is generally production units, when chemical industries, oil industries, any industries which has got some impact on the environmental pollution or environmental problems. Those industries needs to go under ISO 14,001 certification. So it is environmental management system. And you have ISO 20,000. This ISO 20,000, it is specifically for BPOs, business process outsourcing organization. So there it has got requirements. When you want to do BPO certification, then you need to refer to the requirement in this particular standard. Then you have ISO 22,000. ISO 22,000 is a food safety management system. 22,000 is food safety management system. In supply chain, how do you manage your food safety management? About that requirement is given in ISO 22,000. And you have ISO 22,301. 22,301. That is nothing but business continuity management. How you can continue your business even in case of exigencies happening, even there is a natural calamity, even there is a fire, even there is a earthquake, even there is a flood. When such a situation, how you can continue your business operations? What are all the techniques are available? What are all the requirements you have to meet if you want to go for ISO 22301? That is addressed in 22001. It is business continuity management, and comes 27001. This is a standard which is giving requirements for information security management system. Okay, this annexure SL, it is a framework for any standard, has to have some guiding principle. How a standard has to look like, what are all the parameters, what are all the attributes standard has to have it. Those norms are given in annexure SL. It's a framework for any generic management standard. Okay. So when you go to 27001, this is the generic appearance of the 27001 standard. This is the generic appearance of the 27001, and it starts with introduction. It gives introduction about 27001, why the 27001 has come, and what was necessitating 27001. About that it is addressed, and in scope it is addressing about what are all the attributes this particular standard is going to cover. About that it is given in the standard, and as well as who all can use the standards. About that also given in scope. Normative reference, obviously it is from 27,000. From 27,001, 27,000 only the 27,001 has come. So normative references are referred in class number 2. And terms and definitions. Terms and definitions, again here it will be asking you to refer to 27,000 vocabulary standard. And then real stuff starts from class number 4. When you want to plan for ISMS, it starts from class number 4. You need to understand each classes thoroughly when you plan to go for implementing ISMS 27000. So class number 4, it discuss about context of the organization. It is nothing but why your organization is existing, what for your organization is existing, what you are planning, what you are doing it, what kind of business you are doing it. So obviously when you are doing business, yes, you always have issues. It can be internal or it can be external. So this class number 4.1, you need to address what are all the issues pertaining to your organization or your business operations. What are all the internal issues are there, and what are all the external issues are there. If something goes wrong, or if you are not addressing those issues, that will hamper your business operation. So those issues needs to be identified. And in 4.2, apart from identifying issues, internal and external issues, 4.2 addresses about the interested party. Who are all your relevant stakeholders? Whom are all you are responsible? And you need to identify those interested parties, whether any regulatory requirement is there, whether any statutory requirement is there. What about your clients? What about your other stakeholders? What about your local political requirement? And what is their need? So interested parties needs to be identified in 4.2, and their expectation, what is the expectations from your organization, that needs to be identified. So these are all the two important points which you need to thoroughly evaluate, and you have to address those points. And from these two only you are going for the scoping of ISMS. The ISMS scoping comes from internal and external issues pertaining to your organization, as well as your interested parties' needs and expectations. From here, you are getting a scope of ISMS. Okay, my scope of my ISMS. Yes, I am going to protect confidentiality, integrity, and availability of my IT system, my IT network, IT hardware, and personnel. So about that, you can make a scope. Scoping is done based on the understanding of the organization's context, as well as understanding the needs and expectations of the interested parties. So one by one it flows. This is the sequence. Then you are establishing, after defining your scope, then you are planning for establishing the information security management system. So okay, you have now you are planning to implement or establish information management system. But what are all the supports you need? Yes, you need a strong leadership commitment. Unless your organization leadership is accepting for establishing this, you will not be able to do it. So it is starting from your leadership. Leadership commitment should be there, and leadership. The leaders shall be made aware of what is the importance of ISMS implementation, why they need to implement ISMS, and what are all the benefits they will get if they are implementing 27001. That needs to be understood by the management, understood by the leadership. Then only they will give appropriate support. Unless they have a benefit, business benefit, they will not just go for implementation. So they need to understand the importance, and they need to understand the benefits of ISMS. Then only they will support. Then once they understand, yes, then they plan for establishing a policy, ISMS policy. ISMS policy comes from the scope as well as from the leadership commitment. It is a high level policy about protecting your organizational assets from sabotage, from hampering, from attacking, from any other natural disasters. So they make a high level policy. Policy will mention about what they will be doing for protecting the organizational assets in order to continue with the business. About policy will be there. And okay, policy is given. It is given by, it is in general, it is policy statement is given by the top management. Policy is given, and to meet the policy, there shall be defined roles and responsibility. Who will do what? Information. It is not only that the policy statement alone will help you to in achieving information management system establishment. No. So there are dedicated roles. Who will be responsible for ISMS implementation? Who will be responsible for operations? Who will be responsible for communication security? Who will be responsible for other 14 domains are there. So it is 14 domains, 14 area addressed in the standard, and who will be responsible for all these particular domains or all this particular area of work. That needs to be clearly defined, and what each persons will do, that also needs to be clearly mentioned in the roles and responsibility. Then you plan for ISMS. You have identified the issues related to your organization, internal and external, and you have identified the interested parties' needs and expectations. You have done the scoping of your ISMS, and you have got a commitment from management. Then the management gives you direction about implementing this ISMS by issuing the policy. And after issuing the policy, roles and responsibilities are identified and defined. Then we are planning for implementing the ISMS. Why? Ultimately, ISMS implementation needs to give you minimal risk. When you are up, any kind of exigency comes, yes, I will be able to survive. I will be able to continue with my business with the minimum hampering or with minimum effect. There will not be total paralysis. There will not be total chaos. I will be able to, even chaotic situation happen, even it is hampered, I will be able to continue my operations by implementing business continuity processes. That is what the beauty of this particular standard. So here planning, the very important part of planning is risk assessment. Risk assessment, now the part comes, what are all the problems your assets are having? Now you have personal assets, you have physical assets, you have information assets, you have so many assets. Now we are planning to protect all these assets. How will you protect it? Unless otherwise you know the risk associated with each asset, it will be difficult for you to plan for your ISMS establishment. First key thing to start with is risk assessment, because every devices, every assets you have got inherent vulnerabilities. Those inherent vulnerabilities, if it is exploited by anybody, you will have a problems. You will have a problems in running your business. So the vulnerabilities needs to be identified in every assets. After identifying the vulnerabilities, what are all the opportunities available? How these vulnerabilities can be exploited? And that is nothing but what are all the threats available to exploit the vulnerabilities in your organization. So first is asset identification. After identifying it is including personal identification, including your physical asset, including the information, including your network, everything. So everything you are identifying, then the vulnerability associated with all the assets are analyzed, are first identified, analyzed, and after analyzing the vulnerabilities, what are all the threats available for each vulnerability? That needs to be understood. So first is identification of assets, identification of vulnerabilities with each assets, and then what are all the threats each assets are having that can go wrong if they are exploiting the vulnerability existing. So then comes the risk assessment. So vulnerability is there, you know, asset and assets vulnerability, you know, then you have a threat. All the three together gives you a value, a quantified value, that is known as risk value. That is known as risk value. Once each asset is calculated for its risk, then you are making a decision. Okay, this risk, I with every assets I have a risk value. Now, how will I manage the risk? Now you have to go with acceptance criteria. Okay, these are all the risk. Now I have quantified the risk. Now, if this risk is falling below certain level, I will accept. I will be able to accept it, because if such risk levels are misused, I'm not going to have much amount of business loss, or I'm not going to lose my reputation. So such acceptance criteria you are making it risk, that is called risk acceptance criteria. And once risk acceptance criteria is done, whatever value is going to beyond risk acceptance criteria, all those risk I need to mitigate or I need to control. That is what is the main purpose of carrying out risk assessment. You are carrying out a risk assessment. During the risk assessment, you are making a risk acceptance criteria, and you are deciding any assets which is having more than the risk acceptance criteria value needs to be risk needs to be mitigated, or risk needs to be treated. For that only you are going to this particular standard. Now you have identified the risk, you have identified the risk value, and you have known risk acceptance criteria. Now we found many of the items which is going beyond risk acceptance criteria. Now I need to control my risk values. How will you control it? For controlling the risk only, you are having a list of, I was telling about 14 domains. You have 14 domains. In each domain, there are number of controls available. You place those controls in place so that appropriate risk will be minimized, or appropriate risk will be mitigated to the acceptance level of risk value. So the point of control, the purpose of control is identifying control is, you know, assets are available and you know there is a risk acceptance criteria. Any assets which is having more than the risk acceptance criteria value needs to be redressed, or needs to be mitigated, or needs to be treated. How will you treat it? Appropriate control you identify and put in place those control in practice so that you can minimize the risk value. That is what is point. So it is not only it is one-time exercise, because this risk assessment also needs to be regularly reviewed. That is what is the beauty of the standard. This standards, it is requesting you, it is requiring you to go for regular review of the risk assessment. It is not that just I have identified, I have left it and it is there as it is, I'm happy. No. What any new risk may come also. Some of the risk you may not have identified during the identification process. Maybe now you may be identifying some new risk also must have come. Maybe because of technology, maybe because of using outdated tools and techniques, maybe because of competency problems of your employed manpower. So these new risk needs to be analyzed, and every at a regular interval this risk assessment needs to be redone, and the risk acceptance criteria also needs to be whether I am safe with this risk acceptance criteria, or I wanted to increase or decrease the risk acceptance criteria level. Okay, so you can have a then analysis, and after that you are assured that yes, system in place, yes, I can now implement the ISMS. The very first point of ISMS is identifying the assets, identifying vulnerabilities, identifying threats, and calculating the risk value for each assets, and to decide risk acceptance criteria, and whether this risk acceptance criteria is within the limit or out of limit. If you found it is out of limit, then you need to go for risk treatment using the controls mentioned in 27001 standard. That is what is the point. Okay, now how will you do it? Yes, you need resources, you need competence, you need awareness, you need to communicate to the appropriate persons. Then only you can think about establishing the or implementing the ISMS standard. For this, why we are calling it as a system? It is not that it is one individual come and one hero is there, he will take care of everything. No, it is everybody who is working in each domain needs to aware of what is what is ISMS. Okay, ISMS. So what is my role to play to implement ISMS to control security problems? Yes, that needs to be defined. So you have a documentation. Documentation has to clearly define about risk assessment, about risk identification, about risk acceptance criteria, about calculating the risk, and about regular risk assessment, and who will do the risk assessment, who will analyze the risk assessment, and who will decide the acceptance criteria as well as risk treatment plans. So this risk treatment plan and risk acceptance criteria in general is done by the process owners. So we were telling about 14 domains. This 14, one is physical and environmental domain, another is cryptography domain, another is operation security domain, you have network security domain, you have business continuity process domain. Likewise, there are so many incident management domain. So each domain has got process owners. So any assets pertaining to any domain needs to be accepted by the process owners. Any domain, it has got a process owner, and the risk assessment criteria, risk acceptance criteria, as well as the risk treatment plan needs to be known by the process owner. So he has to give the approval. Likewise, you have so many in operations. In operations, you are during the operations, what are all the thing? It is a regular assessment of risk assessment, as well as after putting in place the control effectiveness needs to be seen. So during the operations, you have to measure the effectiveness of the control, so that the control is put in place is very effective, and any new controls needs to be ordered also can be identified during the regular review, and you regularly monitor and do the measurement, analyze the measurement wherever any gap area found. Yes, again you reassess the risk. You during the measurement, if you find that control is not effective, and you need to identify the additional what are all the additional controls I need to put in place, needs to be identified, and they need to again reassess the risk. And these are all the two techniques available, internal audit as well as management review. During these two processes, internal audit, if you establish ISMS system, it is mandatory to have internal audit at a regular interval, management review at regular interval. During these two activities, the effectiveness of control also will be assessed, as well as the process improvement also wherever there is a gap area. It needs to cover all the domains, and wherever there is a gap area, that needs to be identified by the internal audit team, and they need to project to the management that these are all the gap area, this needs to be redressed. So again, this internal audit as well as management review, monitoring, measurement, analysis, it needs to be done at a regular interval. Standard says regular interval. That organization needs to define whether it is every 6 months once, or whether yearly it will be done, or whether it is every quarter you need to done. That is to be decided by the organization, and it needs to be defined in the procedure document, and according to the definition they need to continue with the operations. Then improvement. Okay, now process established, it is implemented, it is monitored, and there are gap area identified. That gap area, that is nothing but through your measurement you can identify the gap area, through internal audit you can identify the gap area, through management review also you can identify the gap area, and there are some non-conformities found. Those non-conformities needs to be addressed. Those non-conformity needs to be addressed by implementing corrective actions. So you do the corrective action for the non-conformance, hence you are continuously improving the system, ISMS system. So ISMS is a proactive system which gives you room for not only establishing, implementing, it is giving you room for continuous improvement of your management system. Okay, that is what is the point. So in a nutshell, to go for ISMS, because whatever is going to come behind, whatever we are discussing only. So I'm just telling you in a nutshell, if you want to go for organization, first step is identification of internal and external issues, which is going to create a problem for running your organization, or which is going to create a difficult situation for running your organization business. You identify internal issues, external issues, then you identify the stakeholders or interested parties, and what the interested parties expectations. Once you identify these two, you are going for scoping the ISMS. So I know issues, I know interested parties expectation. Now I am scoping what are all the assets I wanted to protect. That will come in your scoping. Then when you scope it, what is your policy to protect it? What is your policy to protect is given in policy statement. Okay, policy statement is given. Then what are all the resources required? What are all the support I need to give as a management person? So that support needs to be taken, and it has to start from the top management, and every individual's roles and responsibility needs to be clearly defined, and you need to identify the risk associated with all your assets, and assessing the risk. After assessing the risk, you decide the acceptance criteria. Any risk which is going beyond the acceptance criteria, you plan for mitigating or treating those risks by putting in place appropriate controls defined in 27001. Okay, and then you again uh, again you do the risk assessment at regular interval, because new risk may also come. Once you complete the risk assessment, then you can plan for entire meeting all other ISMS requirements. You can meeting all other ISMS requirements. So all other ISMS requirements is nothing but 14 domain how I am going to implement in your ISMS system, and after implementing how I am going to monitor. So you monitor, and then you plan for continuous improvement. Okay, so it is more or less PDCA model. It is more or less PDCA model. So like you establish ISMS plan, implement, that is do, then monitor, check, act, maintain and improve. It is very famous. Plan, do, check and act, PDCA. It is applicable for any management system. That is applicable for your ISMS also. So from interested parties and the requirements, interested parties expectations and requirements, you are bringing a scope, establishing the ISMS, implementing the ISMS and operating it, and operating it you are checking, continuously monitoring. Then during the monitoring you are identifying some gap area, and that gap area non-conformities are redressed or corrective actions are incorporated. Then you are continuously improving the ISMS system. It is again in the different way of representation. In planning, what you need to know here is during the planning phase, these are all the important classes you need to see. Context of the organization that we were mentioning about internal, external issues, and interested parties, expectations and needs, then leadership commitment, and then planning, support. These are all the things you have to, these are all the classes you have to look at when you are planning for ISMS. Then operations, you have identified, you have planned, now you are operating it, establishing it, implementing it, and you are operating it. During the operations, you are checking for the performance. During the performance check, you are identifying some gap area or some non-conformities. Those non-conformities needs to be corrected. That leads to continuous improvement. It is another pictorial representation of PDCA model. Context of the diagram. Now I think it is whatever we have discussed only is going to come. Understanding the organization. It is a class number. What is this 4? 4 is class number 4 of the ISMS standard. It is a requirement standard. Again telling you it is a requirement standard. This requirement standard class 4 is telling about understanding the organization and its context. The organization shall determine external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose. Just recollect what we were discussing. So whatever internal issues, external issues are there, which is going to affect your organization performance, needs to be identified. And second point is understand the needs and expectations of the interested parties. It may be legal party, legislation, it may be legislatory requirement, it may be statutory requirement, it may be your business requirement, it may be your customer requirement, it may be from your supplier. So understand everybody's needs and expectations. Then you define the scope. After defining the scope, you are planning for establishing the ISMS system. Establish ISMS. Define the ISMS. Yes, we have defined the scope of the ISMS by knowing internal and external issues as well as interested parties' needs and expectations. Define after ISMS scope, you are defining ISMS policy. The ISMS policy is generally the highest, the top man's statement, policy statement, how he is going to implement, how he is going to monitor, how he is going to continuously improve his ISMS related activities needs to be defined in ISMS policy. Then once ISMS policy is defined, then the next step is risk assessment. Identify appropriate assets, identify the vulnerabilities present in the assets, and identify the risk, identify the threats available to, you are expecting to explore or to exploit these vulnerabilities, and then you calculate the risk or risk assessment, carry out the risk assessment. Identify the areas, then yes, how we will come to know which are all the area you need to be managed, because there only your acceptance, risk acceptance criteria comes. So based on the risk values of each assets, any risk value which is going beyond the risk acceptance criteria, you have to manage it, you have to mitigate it, or you have to control it. For that only you can take help from the standard number of controls available, apply all those controls and mitigate the risk. Select control objectives and controls to be implemented, justifying the selection. And then you go for Statement of applicability. Okay, we were talking about 14 domains and 14 area to be covered if you want to go for ISMS. And these all 14 areas together has got around 114 controls. 114 controls. Whatever controls are relevant to each domain, you need to identify according to the business operations. Some of the controls like cryptography, usage of cryptography may not be required at all for your organization. Then those controls you can just leave it. I don't want cryptography controls to be established in my organization. So there is no need for it. None of the business operations are going to use my cryptographic controls like that. And you have incident management. Incident management, in fact, invariably it is applicable for every organization. Any incidents happens, how I am going to manage those incident, how I am going to respond to the incident. So then there is a plan and acquisition plan and developing control. In that there are so many controls. There is a control called outsource development, taking service for software development from outsourced entities. So there is no policy for in my organization, there is no policy to take any outsourced development. So that control is not applicable. Likewise, a statement of applicability, it is nothing but you have identified the threats, you have identified the vulnerabilities, you have identified the risk, I mean the asset. Each asset has got vulnerability, it has got exploitation probability that is coming through threats. So now I wanted to mitigate this risk through appropriate controls. That controls is coming from 27001. That is known as statement of applicability. Okay. Now you define the scope. A document should be prepared to that describe the ISMS in terms of organization, location, for which location, organization, where it is located, and what are all the assets will be coming under, what are the technology will be coming under this particular scope of ISMS needs to be defined, and it shall be a documented format. Scope will demonstrate to the management their security responsibility and encourage them to pay appropriate attention to the subject. Very, very important. We have discussed already. Then, while defining the scope, this also we have discussed. While defining the scope, the key point note is understanding the organization and its context. That is nothing but internal and external issues needs to be clearly understood by the organization. When they are doing business, what are all the internal problems they are expecting, what are all the external problems they are expecting for running and continuing with the business, that needs to be identified. And they need to identify the needs and expectations of the interested parties, maybe their customer, maybe legal entities, maybe statutory entities, so the maybe service providers, maybe customers. So what is their interest, what is their needs and expectation needs to be understood. Then you go for risk calculations, risk assessment. Then you determine the scope, then establish the ISMS management system. Example, as the scope, when you are defining the scope, you can say personal information about the staff, all other information related to their business processes, all information processing facilities including computers, LAN and internet connections, all software used to process information, storage media. This all will be the scope of my ISMS needs to be defined. That is why I was telling personal assets, systems, software, and any other media, all those things I am covering under my ISMS. That needs to be defined in ISMS scope. Then comes ISMS security policy. You are written down once, first is scope, second is security policy. A written policy document should be available to all employees. It is not only that it is available only to the top management, it should be available to all employees, those who are there in ISMS scope, so that what is the policy, what is the security policy of this organization, what should be my contribution, that will be made aware to the people, and they will take interest and they will take ownership for protecting our your security practices. It should contain statement of intent by the senior management, The policy should be simple and to the point. The top level policy, security policy statement should be distributed to all staff. The appropriate lower level policies. Apart from these top level policies, I was mentioning about 14 domains or 14 area you need to cover when you are planning for ISMS, or when you want to protect your confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your services or your system or your business. There are, in each domain, there are some domain level policies, that is called secondary level policies. So for each domain there are policies. Those policies also needs to be defined. Then yes, policy is defined, and you have got a leadership, or your management has to give a commitment for making this policy, vision, or mission to become successful. You need a support from management, and management has to define the roles and responsibilities. Once roles and responsibilities are defined, it becomes responsibility of each individual, or whoever has been designated with a particular task is responsible for carrying out the activities. Okay. Earlier, you take any standards, earlier it was called management responsibility, but now from this 2013 onwards, it is known as leadership commitment and leadership support. Okay. Ensuring that ISMS policy and ISMS objectives are established and are compatible with strategic directions of organization, directing and supporting persons to contribute to the effectiveness. Why it is? Because policy, why they are recommending policy to be known to everybody? Because they will know what is the policy and they will try to contribute their level best to meet the policy requirements. That is why the standard is recommending for communicating policy statement to not only employees, even to the other stakeholders who are interested in your organization. To them also, what is your ISMS policy practice? The high level policy needs to be communicated. Then do planning after policy is defined. After policy is defined, you have to think about identifying the risk associated with each task. Why, what for we need to analyze the risk? Because we want to prevent or reduce the undesired effect for your business operation or for your IT system operations. And we wanted to achieve continual improvement. For how will you prevent? You need to identify the vulnerabilities present in your system or in your assets. So those vulnerabilities needs to be seen that it is not exploited. How you will assure that it is not exploited? Put appropriate controls. If you put appropriate controls like security, like unauthorized entry, physical entry. If you talk about physical entry, unauthorized access prevention, you have a physical security there, and he is scrutinizing all the not only employees, any outsiders coming in. Anybody is unauthorized, you will not allow to enter inside. Similar setup is there for IT systems also. You have so many people, coming and seeing your website. People are seeing your business. They are accessing your information. But those information which is not supposed to be accessed by them should not be available to them. So you have to have appropriate access provisioning. Appropriate access provisioning has to be practiced. It is a control. It is nothing but like your security, physical security. Access provisioning is one of the control. So appropriate person has to have access provisioning only area pertaining to their operations, their business. They should not be like you have a finance, you have a HR, you have a other operation team, you have network team. It is not that network team operations access provisioning should be available to operations. So operation person will try to, that is a vulnerability. If you are not putting appropriate access control for every domain, then that becomes a vulnerability. So that vulnerability is nothing but then how it will be, what are the threats? It will be misused. Misuse is the threat. So misuse is the threat. So how will you mitigate that threat? Just to put appropriate control, appropriate access provisioning. And not only that, actions to address this risk. You have identified assets, you have identified vulnerability, you have identified threats, and you have calculated the risk. And this risk is, if it is going beyond acceptance criteria, then you address it. You need to mitigate it by appropriately selecting the controls. And then you have ISMS objectives. We were mentioning about ISMS policy. We were telling that ISMS policy is a top level policy which will ensure, which will try to ensure the availability, confidentiality and integrity of your system and assets and information. Then you have to have a ISMS objective, security objective, because security objective is not, there is a policy and there is a policy objective. Policy is a high level statement given by the management, but how I am going to meet the policy? So sector wise or domain wise, you need to have a objective. Okay, I will not allow any malware to enter into my network. I will see that all the roles and responsibilities are defined for each individuals. The access provision will be given to each provisional, and there will be a restriction that these employees will be restricted to only the access provision. They will not be able to penetrate into others. Like that, you have a objective. So this objective, why we are calling it as objective? Because objectives are measurable. Whatever can be measured, that only needs to be given as a objective. Like all my systems will be undergoing this one VAPT every year, that vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. Whether all my system or I will restrict to some system which is very critical. About that, then whether if you are making objective that yes, these are all the system will undergo VAPT every year by external agency, whether those VAPT exercises are carried out by the external agency, and if it is carried out, what is the effectiveness? So this all becomes your objective. And maybe awareness. I know my employees, whenever they are joining or whenever they are there in the organization, what is the awareness level? How I am going to make them competent? What is my program? Okay, I am going to give on the job training. I am going to give in a year this many hours of training for each individual on ISMS or information security. Like in a new recruit comes, he will be given induction training. Like that, you make a objective so that he is aware of the system established, so that he will support or he will contribute to his level best to protect your organizational information. So those points you can give it as an objective, so that ultimately you are meeting the ISMS security policy. So risk assessment, we have very elaborately discussed. Perform risk assessment to identify the high security risk area. Depending on the degree of assurance required, manage the risk by reducing, avoiding, transferring it, employing suitable controls. So you have found that risk is calculated, risk acceptance criteria is notified, and any item which is having more than accepted level of risk needs to be mitigated. So we are putting appropriate controls, and we are, not only that, we are just putting, even after putting appropriate controls, I'm not able to reduce the risk. Then what I can do? I can avoid those risks. I can avoid those risks by transferring to your own service provider or to some third party like VAPT. I do not have expertise to carry out VAPT, but I can subcontract my VAPT to somebody else for execution. So some third party who is nowadays when you go for ISMS certification, third party vendors are there. Those vendors needs to be certified by certain. If they are certain certified empaneled auditors, they can do the VAPT. So you are transferring this issues to them, and it is their responsibility to see that as per your contract agreement, yearly twice or it is once in a year, they need to do the VAPT, and they need to identify the problems available, gap area available, or vulnerabilities available in the system, and they need to give you appropriate report. And the fixing point comes your responsibility. So once they identify the risk, vulnerabilities, then it is a responsibility of the organization to fix the vulnerabilities. Okay, so it is nothing but when you find risk is uh, going beyond acceptance level, but I wanted to control, but those risks you can avoid, or those risks you can transfer to third party. like you can have like a business like you have so much amount of financial data theft happen or hampering happens, you can have an insurance kind of thing. So okay, my this suppose something happens, the bank will or the my entity will be held responsible. I can have a safe holding along with taking insurance like that. That is risk transfer. Okay, and monitor the risk with regular reviews of threats, controls in place and their effectiveness. We have discussed elaborately about this. And the information security objective we have discussed very elaborately. It is nothing but you need to, after policy comes information objective. Information objective is nothing but it is a measurable items of implementing information security policy or meeting the information security. But to meet my information security policy, these are all the objectives, and these objectives I will be able to measure and see how effective it is. That is what is the point here. And examples of security objectives: resource protections, the ability to secure all type of system resources. Yes, I will be able to protect all types of system resources by putting so and so controls, maybe malware protection, maybe antivirus protection, maybe in network I may be putting intrusion prevention system, intrusion detection system, maybe sandbox. So such a decision you can take. So but you can measure also. Okay, I have decided I will I will put in place antiviruses. Okay, I have so many system in place for my business operations, but how many systems are currently having antivirus system, malware detection system? Whether all the system? Yes, all the systems are, but what is the status, whether it is currently getting updated for new signatures? So you need to have a continuous review. And authentication, yes, only authenticated persons will be made to use or see or look at your resources. So authentication, I will see that these critical information will be seen only by the authenticated users. Yes, then you have to have a control. Authentication provision has to be there at server level as well as at client level. Then authorization, I was telling about access provisioning. Okay, you have including your own employees, you have a roles and responsibility defined, and you ensure that the person using your system sticking to the authorization or access provision given. He is not violating the access provision given, or he is not having any chance to violate the access provision, or he is not able to penetrate into other purviews or other operations. Okay, so review the risk. Selection and control objective we have seen already. Selection of control should be made, bring down risk acceptable. Yeah, we have discussed everything. Selection of control should be cost effective. Statement of applicability we have discussed. Having selected relevant controls, objectives and controls for each risk. See, for each risk means one item is there, the item has got vulnerability has got threat. Once that is exploited, that becomes a risk. So for to mitigate that risk, what control you are putting in place? That is nothing but statement of applicability. And statement should also regard the exclusion. Suppose some control is not applicable for your organization, you can exclude those controls with a proper justification. Example, statement of applicability. Example, control against malicious software. Yes, all the system I need to protect with malicious against malicious software injection. Yes, this particular control is applicable. Why it is applicable? Because highlighted with the risk assessment. Risk assessment shows that if you allow malicious code injection, malicious software injection into your system, it will hamper or it will create a chaos in the system operation. So risk value is calculated, it is high. Hence, I will be putting control against malicious software. Such a decision. So it is not only for exclusion, even for selecting a control also, you need to give a justification. Then support, obviously, yes, without support you cannot do it. Resources, because already your top management has convinced for establishing the information security management system, they are bound to give resources. They are bound to take competent people, or competency of the persons needs to be ensured even after recruitment through trainings, on-the-job training or induction training or continuous training program. And awareness, they should be made aware of what is ISMS, what is their roles and responsibility to support ISMS operations in your organization, what are all the precautions they have to take uh, to support or to strengthen the ISMS activities in your organization. And communications, how frequently this about this information will be communicated, ISMS information. Suppose some incidents comes, in spite of establishing ISMS system, well, the incident happens. If incident happens, whom to be communicated? So it should be known to whom it is to be communicated, and within how much time it is to be communicated, and within how much time it has to be resolved. Incident needs to be resolved. About that needs to be addressed in communication. And during the communication, what are all the security precautions they have to take? About that it has to address, and this all is addressed through documented information. This is what is the point here. You have practices, everything in place, but whether those practices are in documented version. Why the standard is insisting for documented version? Because you are if it is personal dependent, if you follow heuristic method, always there is a hero, he takes care of everything. Once hero goes, leaves the organization, there will be chaos. So anybody comes and goes, the system will take care of my CAA. It will protect my CAA. That is why the system demands for documented information. Every operations needs to be defined, and as per the defined procedure only, the operation has to happen. And it needs to be reviewed also accordingly. Okay, you have made documents, maybe security policy manual, maybe security procedure, maybe security objective, maybe statement of applicability, maybe incident management procedure. These are all we have made it. It was made just for getting the ISMS implementation. But after that, do we have reviewed it? Yes, it has to be continuously reviewed. And after reviewing, if it is found adequate even for current scenario, for even today's scenario, then okay, you see that okay, no modification is required. So, but the review is mandatory, and control all these documents. These documents and this information shall be controlled. To whom all it should be available, to whom all it should be restricted, whether it is available publicly or it is for internal use or it is for restricted use or it is only for top management. Like that, you have to have a classification of the documents so that you can control those documents. Operations, it is though we are telling it is information risk assessment we are carrying out. It is not only carrying out, it needs to be at regular interval. Risk assessment has to be redone. That is what is during the operations you have to do it. And once you do it, implement a risk assessment plan, allocate resources, responsibilities, implement controls to meet control objectives, implement training and awareness. This we have already discussed enough. Manage the operations. Once you establish the system, you have a documented procedures in place, and you see that this documented procedures are known to everybody, and everybody is following the documented procedure only, and appropriate resources are available for them only, so that you can manage the ISMS operations. You can manage the resources. It is now okay, you have resources, and there is a policy that okay, my resources shall not be used more than this much percentage, like acceptable use policy. I have a system, my system processor consumption shall not be more than 50% or 60%. My hard disk shall not go beyond this. So there shall be process monitoring. So process monitoring, if it is identifying that a processor, this particular processor is used more than whatever acceptable use policy, then it has got a risk. So that those risks needs to be mitigated. Okay, implement the procedure, and then after implementing, monitoring we have already discussed. You have to monitor it continuously. You have to make appropriate measurement, and analyze the measured result and evaluate where you are standing. That you know your policy, you know your objective, and objective is made and you are making measurement now, and through the measurement you will come to know where you are standing, what is your objective, what is the measured value, and what is the gap area. Okay, there is a no gap area, no problem, absolutely. There is a gap area, yes, I need to put additional controls. So such kind of decision you can take, and you need to conduct internal audit regularly. You need to conduct management review regularly, which is leading to the improvement of the system, whole system. That is why we are telling it is a proactive system, which will help you to have a sustained information security management system. If implemented, you can have very, you can take very less risk, or it is making you to go with very less risk in hampering your business operation or your regular operation. Okay, it is assuring the continuous improvement also. So execute monitoring controls, it is there. Okay, we have done with this. Okay, maintain and improve, we have discussed already. Communicate the results, yes. Ensure, this we have done already. And then this is ISMS documentation, this also we have discussed. Documentation is very, very important, because everything needs to be practiced as per the document available. That is why we are calling it as a system. System has got input, system has got output, and system has got a process. So it has to be a defined process. Through the process only you have to operate the system. You have a documented procedures. Okay, documented records are there. So these are all the documentations required by ISMS system. You need to have a statement of applicability. You need to have a security policy and security policy control objectives. You need to have a scope. You need to have a risk assessment and management reports. You need to have a documented procedures needed by the organization to ensure planning, operation, and control of ISMS processes. Records required by the ISMS standard and statement of applicability. These are all the documents mandated by the ISMS standard. So critical success factors, security policy, objective, activities should reflect the business objectives. Ultimately, what we are going to run our business, we are going to improve our business, we are going to continue with our business to have your material benefit. How? It through applying security policies, objectives, and activities. And you need to have a visible support and commitment from the management, and good understanding of security requirements, risk assessment, and risk management. It is a very, very important point. How they need to do the risk assessment, what are all the assets they need to do the risk assessment, what is the criteria for doing the risk assessment, everything needs to be understood thoroughly. And it is a effective marketing of security to all. So it is like when you introduce this particular management system, what is the benefit the organization is getting? What is the benefit the individual is getting? What is the benefit the other stakeholders are getting? Needs to be understood. Then distribution of comprehensive guidance, education, and training. It is very, very important. After establishing, you should ensure that the persons or the related concerned persons working in the ISMS activities needs to know what is ISMS, what is the policy, what is their responsibility to improve upon the established ISMS system. That awareness shall be created. So there shall be a comprehensive and balanced system of measurement. But the problem is to determine how much is too much, so that we can implement appropriate security measures to build adequate confidence and trust. Yes. Then again, ultimately, it all goes to your business benefit. What by implementing these controls, what is ultimately my benefit? How much financial benefit I am going to get? How much market reputation I am going to get? Based on that only, you need to go for ISMS implementation. Therefore, information security needs to be managed by in an effective manner, cost effective manner. That is more relevant, cost effective manner. So I was telling always about 14 domains or 14 area. This is the 14 domains of ISMS system or ISO IEC 27001. Information security policy. Yes, we have discussed about policy. Organization of information security policy. Organization of information security. This organization of information security, how you will be organizing your information security in practice. Like you have a place there, all your business operations are going on, and what are all the domains I have to address, and there are some operations which is happening outside your location, outside your premises, offsite it is happening. For that, what kind of information security I'm going, that is called a mobile device and telenetworking policy. When they are operating your business operations or your organization operations from outside the premises of your ISMS location, then there shall be policy for telenetworking as well as for mobile device security. What are all the security to be in place to connect to your system? Organization of security. Then human resource security. Human resource security, what are all the human resource security you have to taken care, like before recruiting a person, what are all the competency requirement is there, and what kind of assessment you will do, what kind of background screening you will do before recruiting. Then if appropriate screening is done, yes, about the persons you can have the confidence. And not only that, once you recruited, after recruiting, what kind of trainings he needs to be given, what all training he needs to undergo, that needs to be identified, and appropriately it has to be done. Okay, it is now he is there, he is working with you, and during working, what are all the his responsibility, how he is supposed to work for your organization, taking into account of your ISMS activities. Once he is working, it is not a problem. Now he wants to leave your organization. So what are all the controls you have to put in place? Yes, so what kind of NDA, that is non-disclosure agreement, you have to take from him. Even after leaving the organization, what is his liabilities pertaining to your organization needs to be taken into non-disclosure agreement or in terms and conditions of recruitment, terms and conditions of employment. Post liability, that is how he may retire, he may superannuate, or he may get a job in other organization. When he is going to other organization, what is his responsibility, and up to what time his responsibility prevails for this current organization needs to be agree. He has to agree, and he has to sign a NDA for that, and he should be made aware that also. So he is working in a critical area, going maybe think about some IPR related activities, maybe some design, critical design may be there. After leaving your organization, he may go to your competitor. There, if he is going and revealing all your confidential information, what will be the effect? So he needs to have a control that if it has come to the light of the organization that he has copied or he has disclosed some of the critical informations of your organization to your competitor organization, what kind of binding he needs to have it. About that has to be addressed in the non-disclosure agreement. And asset management, yes, we are talking about asset management. For every operations, maybe network, you may have operations, you may have physical and environmental, you may have you may have support services, you may have HR, you may have so many. For each operations, each discipline, each sector, you may have assets, and those assets needs to be managed. It is addressed in 8.8, that asset management. And for how you will have an inventory, and you will have asset owner, and what is the asset owner responsibility, about that it is addressed in asset management. How asset movement will be monitored, about that it is mentioned. And access control, very very important. Access control, it is not only physical control. Now they are in a system, and every person has been given roles and responsibility. They have to restrict to their roles and responsibility only. About that it is discussed in access control. And it is talking about registration and deregistration of users also. And it is designed, the access provisioning is decided by the process owners. Process owners have got so many employees, and each employees will do what work based on the responsibility, roles and responsibility. The process owners gives the access provisioning to the system. Cryptography, yes, again cryptography, whether it is applicable or not, depends on the organization. You need to decide. Physical and environmental security, it is very, very important. That is why in the beginning itself, I was telling the ISMS is the information security is the extension of existing physical security, because physical security, because it may lead to a lot of unauthorized entry, it may lead to theft, it may lead to sabotage, it may lead to so many problems. So physical and environmental security also very, very important. Operation security is very, very important when they are operating it. How, what all precautions they have to take care. Whether all those system, whether it has to be with when they are connecting to the business servers, when they are connecting to their own organization, when they are doing the business, whether it is happening in controlled environment, whether all those systems has got operating system patch up as per the plan, whether it has got antivirus updated as per the plan. So those needs to be monitored during operation security. And communication security, when communication security is when communication is happening, how the communication has to happen, and when they are sending and receiving and storing, what kind of security has to be in place. It needs to be addressed in communication security. What are all the equipment they need to have? What are all the protocols they have to follow? Whether all those routing to outside communication, whether it has to be routed through firewall. So such a decisions you have to take, and accordingly the security, communication security has to be ensured. System acquisition and development. During the system acquisition and development, what are all the security requirements you are looking for? As to when you are acquiring something, that is acquisition. When you are acquiring new system, what is your security requirements? So you have to have a procedure for when you are acquiring some system, some software or some hardware. You have to have a security requirements in place, and you have to acquire only such a equipments or such a system or such a software which is meeting your requirement, which is addressed in your acquisition procedure. And development, during the development, what are all the software, secure software engineering principle you have to follow. And when it is a new system development, okay, if you are upgrading your existing system, yeah, there shall be definitely there shall be requirement, new requirement. For the new requirement, you have to have a change process, change policy in place. Unless otherwise a new feature or new requirement is to be added to a existing one, unless otherwise it is change control process followed, you cannot allow that to happen, because it will be very difficult if you are not controlling the changes in the existing one. And supplier relationship, supplier, where you have a suppliers, maybe internet service provider, you may be so many other service provider, how they will be managed and how they should become responsible for your ISMS practices. About that you need to address in this supplier management. And information security incident management, yes, you have established, it is there, you are continuously monitoring. But in case of incident, maybe it may be about availability issue. Your availability issue is there, to whom your users has to contact. So there shall be a contact person, and they should be intimated immediately. And once intimated, how fast they will be responding to the user needs to be addressed. It depends on the criticality of the incidences. The response has to happen, and after response, within how many days or how many hours or how many minutes it will be resolved. So depends on the criticality of the incidents. Response also has to be there, as well as resolution also has to be there. About that, you have to have a incident security management and information security aspect in business continuity management. Even then, now there is a new standard called 22,301, a separate standard for business continuity management. This particular 27,001 also requires, in spite of all these controls in place, if any exigency happens, if any natural calamity happens, if any unforeseen event happens, you are bound to continue your business at least with minimal operations, which is not going to hamper your client. So that assurance needs to be given in business continuity management. You have to have a business continuity uh, processes established, and you have to have a business continuity plan. This business continuity plan has to be tested regularly. You may identify, okay, if fire happens, if flooding happens, if some natural calamity happens, if some malware attack happens, If happens, how are you going to restore your business continuity? That needs to be addressed, and that needs to be tested, and the drill has to be happened. Then domain A18 is compliance, and you are not that you are a single entity, you have freedom to do anything in your premises or in that particular geography or in particular location. So when you are operating some business, what are all the legal and mandatory legislatory statutory laws you are bound to abide by? Those laws you need to identify, and and you have to see that you are meeting the complaints of those laws. About that you need to address in control or control A18, or it is domain A18. So these are A5 to A18s are domains or different area you need to cover when you are planning for ISMS establishment and ISMS operation. Okay, so this is why security policy we have already discussed. Because policy and the security is the organization statement of intent that provides foundation for management and staff alike. So without policy, you cannot achieve anything. So you have to have a strong policy. So internal, this we have discussed, internal to organization of information security, we have discussed. Human resources, we have discussed prior to employment, what is to be done. During employment, what is to be done. And after the employment, what is required, also we have discussed. We have discussed about asset management. Asset management, it is every asset needs to be coming under asset management inventory. Inventory should be there. Asset owner needs to be identified, and acceptable use of assets also needs to be defined. Inventory, ownership, acceptable use, and return of use. Yeah, when asset needs to be returned, what is the process that needs to be established? And media handling, especially disposable medias like your hard disk, your CDs, your floppy disk. Floppy disk anyway no more relevant now. Your hard disk, how will you dispose those items if it becomes faulty or if it becomes not usable? You have to have a policy about that. It has to be addressed in disposal of media. And you have access control, access provisioning, depends on the roles and responsibility of each individual. You have to provide the access access to the system, and access to the system is in general done by the process owners, because they are well aware of each person what he is supposed to do it, and they are supposed to monitor also this access provisioning. Also regularly they are supposed to monitor also. Then it is not only the process owners, every individual also responsible for their system of operation. What is their roles, and like password and user credentials are given, it is his duty to keep it confidential, not to disclose to anybody. And it is his duty to see that he is restraining himself only his whatever access provisioning is there. Even there is a flaw in the system, he is not supposed to breach his access provisioning, others access provisioning. So he should restrict himself to the access, whatever access provisioned. And cryptographic controls we discussed. Physical environmental security, it is again about physical assets security by physical security, as well as by access control, as well as secured room. Then operation security, protection from malware. Yes, not only protection from malware. Yes, if some problem happens, maybe malware attack or some earthquake or some uh, unforeseen event happens, they cannot become helpless. So for that, the system, the ISMS system requires for regular backup. So whatever critical business information is there, that has to be backed up regularly, and not only backing up, the backed up critical information needs to be tested also regularly, so that in case of any exigency comes, they need to they will be able to give the business continuity. So change management we have discussed. Communication security, network, about network security management, information transfer, and it is during acquisition, development, and maintenance we have discussed already. Supply relationship we have discussed already. Management of information security incidents we have discussed already. Then we have information security, BCP we have discussed already. Compliance with legal and contractual requirements we have discussed already. It is all self-explanatory, just you can go through it. Any doubt is there, you can just mail me also, not a problem. Technical compliance. So this is what is your ISMS, and you have to have a mission statement, understanding the organization and context. Mission statement should be there. Okay, and this is what very important. What are all the mandatory document when you go for ISMS? So scope of ISMS should be there. Information security policy and objective should be there. Risk assessment, risk treatment methodology should be there. Statement of applicability, risk treatment plan, risk assessment report, definition of security roles and responsibility, inventory of assets, acceptable use of assets, access control policy, operating procedure for IT management, secure system engineering principles, supplier security policy, incident management procedure, business continuity procedure, statutory, regulatory, and contractual requirements. So these are all the mandatory documents you have to develop for running a ISMS activities. And mandatory records. Apart from those documents, you need to have a records of training, skills, experience to prove the competency of the persons. Monitoring and measurement results. Yes, there is a requirement for monitoring and measurement, the effectiveness of control in place, and that you have to have a result sheets available. Internal audit program, planned internal audit, whether it is conducted as per the plan, and what are all the outcomes of the internal audit. About that, you need to keep a records. Results of internal audit and results of the management review. Yeah, management review is conducted regularly, and what is the outcome of the review needs to be there, mandatory. And results of corrective actions during this internal audit as well as management review. If any non-compliance found, that non-compliance needs to be redressed and corrective actions has to be carried out. The results for corrective actions evidence shall be available. Logs of user activities, exceptions, and security events, that also is required. These are all mandatory documents, mandatory records. And these are all the non-mandatory records, but it will be very much useful if you are making use of all these documents, whatever is mentioned, but it is not mandatory. So we have completed introduction to ISMS as well as 27,001, 27,000 family as well as 27,001. If any question is there, just you can ask.